Well, hi again, everybody. So Chris and I are back, and we're going to talk about voters versus lawmakers, the battle over worker protections. And to give some more context, around the country, particularly in southern states, you're seeing a lot more ballot initiatives be put on the ballot for voters to vote in major elections. And a lot of those ballot initiatives revolve around workplace issues. So in some states, you've had minimum wages being increased because of ballot initiatives, more protections around time off, so on and so forth. But what has happened in some state legislatures is that the ballot gets passed, and then the state legislature decides to roll it back, to something that I guess probably might be more palpable to them, or to the lobbyists that support them, or in some cases repeal laws altogether that were passed by popular measure. So we're going to talk about that tension and what the future holds when it comes to workers' rights and the use of ballot initiatives to get um, more worker-friendly laws on the books. So, Chris, any initial thoughts you want to give to the topic on your end?
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Edgar. I think
Yeah,
you mentioned the word tension there, the tension between, the ballot initiatives that are
yeah,
pro-worker, pro-employee, and then what state legislatures and courts are doing. So there definitely, in my experience, is a lot of tension right now, and
yeah,
I think it's fascinating to delve into and
right.
know everyone's rights.
Yeah. So to start, why don't we give people a quick explanation of what a referendum is, so that people that are not familiar understand it, and what has been driving people to get these referendums on the ballot.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind, Edgar, I may go on a historical detour back for a
Oh,
second because
please,
I
please.
think when I mean, just broadly, when you're talking about worker rights, employee rights, I think it's important to know our history.
Yeah,
And I think what we see in history a lot is that it sort of rhymes or echoes the past. And so what I mean by that here is back at the turn of the last century, what historians call the sort of progressive era, you had a lot of state laws change. Almost every state
right.
changed their laws from like 1895 to like 1915 to allow the people, the citizens of the states, to vote directly to change their laws, their statutes, or their constitution. So it was an amazing accomplishment, so to speak, in the progressive era, because before then you had of course the civil rights amendments, but the history of this country is the history of the few having power. Sort of the white male landowners, and you expand upon that into the progressive era, where now not just the legislature gets to vote, but the people get to vote. And so it's an amazing fact of our history that you fast forward to today, the last 20 or 30 years, people, particularly you mentioned in the South and other lower wage places, are rediscovering these progressive era tools
Hmm.
to change constitutions and to protect power. So I think it's a fascinating time to have that tension.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the key drivers for um, worker groups in particular using these tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So, why in the last 20 or 30 years are we seeing a lot of minimum wage ballot initiatives?
Mhm.
Why is this wave of ballot initiatives happening? And if you live in California, you're probably used to Proposition
Right,
50.
right.
The
Yeah,
direct democracy is more frequent in some places than others. I think Maryland and Delaware are the two that probably has the least, in my
right.
experience, of
Yeah,
direct democracy. But why now? And that's I think it's a really complicated question,
yeah.
a great one. And one thing I may say about that is I think that the political parties, we have state laws that sort of support a two-party system in this country
Mhm,
as opposed to other countries. And the state laws and the parties are sort of realigned in the last
mhm.
20 or 30 years on income and education levels. And so that has produced some different people in power. Um, and different people in power have protected their power in ways that are different. So, what I mean specifically by that is where there may be a state that used to have a legislative majority that could pass laws that were pro worker or pro
Mhm.
employee. you know? And so in that particular state, there wasn't a need to do a ballot initiative because the legislature
Right.
passed laws that were pro-worker or pro-employee, generally speaking. And so
Yeah.
when there's been political science uses this term realignment,
Mhm.
when there's been a realignment of who's in power and who's voting for who, all of a sudden that legislature is passing laws that are not pro-worker. And so, the worker side is saying, well, what do we do here? What avenue is available to us? And that's when they really rediscovered this progressive era direct democracy, which the people in California are saying, hey, we've always had it. You guys are
Right.
sort of using these tools, but they're fascinating tools, and there's actually some distinctions within them that are pretty interesting too. Like some states, you can just repeal a law directly. A lot of them, you can directly initiate a constitutional amendment. So really fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Uh, so as you mentioned earlier, these are very popular measures now. You've seen a lot of successes over the past couple of years, but we're also seeing that now legislatures are pushing back, and oftentimes you're seeing that laws get delayed, get weakened, or get overturned all the way. What are some of the reasons, Chris, for that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as you mentioned, these last 20 to 30 years, the ballot initiatives that are passing, Missouri, for instance, passed a paid leave and minimum wage raise that
Mm.
the legislature later vetoed the leave portion of it. And the governor, signed that and sustained um, the legislature taking out what the people passed. And so I think, Edgar, I mean, you do a lot of great advocacy work. Workers' Fairness raises this issue a lot about workers' rights, but I think there are layers or levels to it. And so
Mhm.
what I mean by that is the level that people communicate about it, lawyers or judges or
Right.
legislatures, that's really a surface level. And there's really more to it. So here's what they say on the surface level. They use like legal concepts like sovereign immunity or
Right.
the abrogation of sovereign immunity. Who has the power to do something? Who's the sovereign? But like that's kind of the legal window dressing level. If you go down a level from that, what it's really about is power and control and money. And so, if you're a worker, you probably understand that intuitively. If you're working, there's a factory in town that they make wind turbine blades.
Mhm.
Um, and so you work in the wind turbine factory, you probably know something about power and control. You probably know, hey, the boss man is in control of this factory, and I really can't tell him how to make the wind turbines. Like
Right.
you understand that at an intuitive level, power and control. But what happens is the farther you get away from workers, the farther you get up in the sort of legal detached reality that a lot of these people live in, you stop using the language of power, control, and money, and you start using these legal fictions, these concepts
Mhm.
that are really detached from day to day. And so I would encourage people to analyze things sort of at their base level, like, hey, what's really going on here? And what's really going on here is people in control are taking power away from other people.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good way of putting it, and but also very unfortunate, but sobering reminder of how sometimes things work. Um, w- if you're someone listening to this and you're not in the legal field or don't have any proximity to power, why does this matter? Like, why should people care?
Yeah, great question. And as a worker, knowledge is power. I mean, that's such a key thing. And going back to the history, I mean, know your history. I mean, such an amazing history in this country. Um, so I think that why should you care? Here's what I hear. My law firm gets about 1,000 working people a week that reach out, and
Mhm.
a lot of them don't know their rights, and a lot of them maybe have a misunderstanding about their rights. They think, they were wrongfully terminated, and it wasn't a wrongful termination. But here's the critique that I hear from people. People say, why should I sign a ballot initiative or why should I vote? Both sides are equally, sometimes they say corrupt or equally
Mhm.
influenced by money. I'm just a worker. Um, but those sides are sort of captured by money and power. People don't care about someone that makes my income. Well, that's kind of what I hear the most of, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't try to like argue with them. I don't try to like give them a sort of ideological side. Um, what I say is I agree with them and I say, okay, like, is that so what then? I agree with you. There is a lot of money in politics in this country. It's not unique to this country. There's a lot of money in policy and business. Yeah, I agree with you. So what? What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do in 10 years or even look back on your life? Are you gonna be proud of standing up for yourself? Are you gonna be proud of educating yourself,
Mm,
fighting for your family, fighting for yourself? And a lot of my clients later, what they say, Edgar, is they say, it was never about the money for me.
hmm
It was about me proving to myself that I was going to do the right thing, and me proving to my friends and family that um, my life has meaning and value,
mm, mm,
and the work that I do matters. And I think when people hear that and when people say that out loud, they get motivated to sign a ballot initiative or to take
yeah,
the next step to stand up for their rights. Because at the end of the day, um, one side does have a lot of money. I think we should say that, but
yeah.
um, there's things that are more powerful than that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Chris. And I to add to that, what I would say is that there is something to the dignity of work that is sometimes lost when we don't have strong worker protections, and so it is important for workers to see themselves as part of a bigger fabric in terms of how we advocate for better workplace policies. Because it does have a tremendous impact on our economy, on our communities, but also I think to the individual, like knowing that when I go to work, there's certain dignities that will be afforded to me um, in terms of being paid a fair and reasonable wage, having protections at work in case that there are things that at work that might be unsafe conditions that I don't have to deal with. Not having to deal with being treated differently because of what you look like. All those things play into a bigger picture as to what we want in a workplace culture nationally, but also in terms of how people feel about themselves as workers individually.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I try to remind myself of, because it's hard work sometimes, it's hard work
Yeah,
advocating for employees, for workers. If you're a worker or employee, it's hard to talk to your boss about your rights or
yeah,
to who has the time to go read all the history and read all the regulations. It's
yeah.
hard. I mean, these days, the way the economy is, but the thing that encourages me, Edgar, is if you look at our history, the big changes that have happened, or even if you're looking at your own life, it's often just small steps by a few people.
hmm hmm
And that's really encouraging to me. I mean, if you look at changes to some of the laws, I mean, it's a few committed people that have always changed the world.
Right,
It always starts with one step. It always starts with a few people, and it doesn't always start with someone saying, "Hey, I'm gonna organize a union, or I'm gonna raise the minimum wage, or I'm gonna
right,
pass the paid leave law." It could just start as simple as like, "Hey, we need to have a meeting to discuss, our wages." I mean, it
right,
it,
right.
it starts small, but the thing that has throughout history always overcome the power of money is the number of people. The
hmm
power of people organized together in common cause has always throughout history, or at least my understanding of it, come out ahead. And so there's a saying that you can get somewhere faster by yourself.
Right,
And so if you're an employee, like you could go to the CEO, you could probably email him or her, or
right.
you could get somewhere faster, but you can get farther together. If you work with people together, you can go a lot farther.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. And something that I want to add to the mix of our conversation is on the employer side. When I was a young attorney, uh, I would often talk to some of my colleagues who are management side employment lawyers about, um, just talking shop. And one thing that always stuck with me is that they'll often say, "Hey, look, we want consistency too. We want to know that." If a law is going to be passed or if a new regulation is going to be passed, I want to understand it because our clients have to make decisions about their operations and making sure that they're compliant with the law. And in talking about these ballot initiatives that we're discussing on this episode, one thing that comes to mind is the idea of consistency, even for employers, when thinking about what to forecast for workforce planning. So I want to hear from you, Chris. Like, do you share that thought about that this is good for everyone? That if a ballot gets passed or law gets passed, that there is no inconsistency or wonderment as to is this actually going to stick? Because
Yeah,
employers need to plan too.
absolutely. And I think consistency is a key feature of law, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
want the rule of law in this country.
yeah,
It's not, to use an example, like if you're a business and you're going into some other country and you have to like pay a bribe to have the laws enforced or
right,
whatever. I mean, that's a key feature of a
right,
system of law of our system. We want certainty. So I think all sides want that certainty. And one in particular, one feature, I think since 2014, maybe only two or three minimum wage issues have not passed.
hmm,
And it's putting that consistency in the Constitution and putting in escalation. A lot of places have escalated that. So that gives you that business planning, that gives you that certainty. And, in particular, the minimum wage issues. I mean, Arkansas has
right,
passed minimum wage issues. No, Missouri did. There's another one at Missouri. I mean, a lot of states. I think maybe Massachusetts is the only
hmm,
one recently that comes to mind that hasn't been as successful. I think they went for a much higher number there.
right,
But the thing I would say about that is the legislature in a lot of those states, had the legislature acted to do that, then there wouldn't have been that movement before the ballot initiative.
yeah,
And the issue is that the culture, so to speak, of the legislatures where there's a lot of lobbyists and a lot of money
mm,
is just really disconnected from your minimum wage
right,
earner. Like,
right,
it's just, what's the book? A Tale of Two Cities. I mean, these are just two
yeah,
different worlds.
yeah,
And, my firm is we're in both worlds. So we represent people and we deal in that world and they're just different and they don't understand each other.
hmm,
And, if you're a business and if you want certainty, lobby your legislature to give you that certainty because they're
yeah,
they're the ones that are by not acting and not responding to the people, they're the ones that are engendering all of these ballot initiatives, and that's a hard thing to do. It's hard
yeah,
to get businesses together to do something that could be viewed as pro worker. That your fellow business owners might not appreciate that at first, but I think if you frame it as you did, Edgar, in terms of certainty, it's certainly a lot cheaper to do it that way than to spend
yeah.
a bunch of money defending a ballot initiative that is going to be wildly popular.
Yeah, and I would just even add that it's also about when you have to make decisions. People are asking for things or knowing what the minimum wage will be, so you can forecast your costs. That there's some power to knowing upfront what to expect. And not wondering or being caught off guard when something suddenly changes. Particularly if something very popular, such as a ballot initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of places, it's unfortunately of it, like the food service industry in particular, has really pushed back on a lot of the minimum wage stuff.
Yeah.
But it's so unfortunate because a lot of the food service industry um, management came from workers. It's people that work their way up in the food service
Hmm.
industry. And so my heart just breaks every time I see a restaurant that are opposing a minimum wage issue. I'm like, guys, if you guys would get together with the legislature, you could have that certainty, you could have that, and
Yeah.
it's just frustrating because they're still wildly popular. Like you're talking about votes of 60%
Right.
for minimum wage, and the business owners that are opposed to the concept of a minimum wage in general are just a very small minority of this country, in my experience.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. So, for those workers who are listening to this episode and are wondering to themselves, I live in a state where we have ballot initiatives, we can get someone on the ballot, but I feel as if I try this, I might face some pushback, whether it's from business groups that are opposed to my worker friendly initiative, or I get it passed, but then the legislature decides to repeal it or slow it down or water it down. What do you tell that person? What would you say? What would you say to inspire them to still move forward? But also at the same time, what practical tips would you give them to be ready for all the different types of ways that pushback might show up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are fears that all workers have, right? Like if you talk to your coworker about something that maybe the boss thinks you shouldn't be talking about, I mean, a lot of people have those fears. And the first thing I would say is the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, protects what's called protected concerted
Mhm.
activity. That's a legal term for working together, communicating together with your employees, and so that's a pretty strong law. There's a lot of wiggle room there, but it's a fairly strong law in my opinion. The NLRA is it always enforced as much as I wish it would be? No, but it's fairly strong.
Yeah.
But I think beyond the NLRA, there are a lot of speech protections in law, and so you see a lot of those cases now about people that are engaging in, the right to petition their government or
Yeah.
their right to speech about issues of policy. And so there's a lot of protections there. The thing I would say, I think, concluding on that for people is um, when you have a retaliation legal issue, not just ordinary discrimination. I mean, no
Yeah.
discrimination is ordinary, but contrasting ordinary discrimination with retaliation. Generally speaking, in the law, retaliation, if proven, is a lot more expensive for the company.
Mhm.
So the penalties for retaliation are worse than ordinary discrimination, sort of generally speaking. And so the company is going to have an economic disincentive to do something to you if you're out there organizing or if you're communicating. It's going to cost them a lot more money.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, there's just power in numbers, there's strength in togetherness. And there's also just power in knowing our history and knowing that all of these ballot initiatives have passed in these deep red, deep conservative
Yep.
states, sort of generally speaking, and knowing again that it's in our history. I mean, going back to the progressive era, like this has happened before in this country. There's no reason it can't continue happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thank you for sharing that. And the one thing I would add is that if you're worried about facing any pushback when looking to get more politically active around pushing a ballot initiative that's worker friendly. Now, I would encourage that people think about broader support. To the point that Chris made about strength in numbers, you'll be surprised at different groups that might really support your initiative that don't really do workers' rights work, but their issues are impacted by workers' rights, and building that broad base of support can go a long way into highlighting how popular something is that's being put on the ballot. It might make certain lawmakers think twice about doing anything that might be seen as anti-populist. So I just want to give that takeaway to people that when thinking about, well, how do I do this in a way that's effective and that is going to be seen as less of a target for a repeal or watering down.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot of allies out there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of money, invested in research and
Hmm.
getting ballot initiatives passed. I mean,
Yeah.
nationally, very impressive. One other anecdote that I thought of, Edgar, on this is the sort of dynamics of ballot initiatives. Of if you're an
Hmm.
employee or you're a group or you're a union group and you're looking at this and how can you gain power and rights, they're often those dynamics often play out in your favor in ways you might not even know. And so
Right.
here's an example of those dynamics. I won't get into the specific names or
Hmm.
state, but this was a state, in the upper Midwest. And it had a group of workers, a group of healthcare workers, minimum wage workers, and they were organizing. They were talking to each other about our conditions. Do we want to unionize? Do we want to try to get a ballot initiative going? And they did a great job. What they did is they found that once they organized and communicated with the company actually agreed with them and worked with them because
Hmm.
it was in the company's interest to give them what they wanted so they could in turn advocate for the company to get a higher reimbursement rate on some of the
Oh, wow.
services the company as a whole was providing.
Yeah.
So instead of having to fight the company on the union or the ballot initiative, they all worked together. It was kind of a trade-off. One side
Yeah.
got their union and their higher wages. The other side got a workforce highly motivated to lobby their federal representatives on a higher reimbursement rate, which made the business more money. So, once you get into this work, it's not, sometimes these things get worked out in a way
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing success story. I mean, I can't remember what the wage went up, but I mean, it was real money in their pockets that, thanks to their efforts.
Yeah. That's a great story. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode. And just as a reminder, Workplace Fairness remains a resource for even issues like this. We do typically track different ballot initiatives that are happening around the country that are pro-worker, and also might do some things to help certain groups advance certain communications around certain initiatives. So always check us out for updates on what's happening around the country from a legislative perspective. All right. Well, thank you all, and see you all soon.